Welcome into the Bobby Carpenter Show with my man Joshua Perry, riding shotgun here. So thank you for tuning in. If you're watching on Bally's, we love it. If you're watching on YouTube, social media, like, subscribe, leave comments. We appreciate all that. We got a huge show today planned. We got our guy, Mr. Anthony Schlegel, coming up after the opening segment here, getting to a lot of stuff with him. We're going to talk a little bit about the first week of spring ball, which is where we're going to start. We got Johnny Manziel making comments about Reggie Bush's Heisman. We're going to have tailgate talk, which is always great. Are the transfers fitting in? What does the coaching staff look like, and how is that breaking down here in the start of spring ball? So we're going to start off here, spring ball. Ohio State, Joshua, 2 practices in the books. There's a lot of things coming out about, different looks, guys moving around, Sonny Styles at linebacker. Kind of what are you hearing? What are you liking so far?
Yeah, those were the things that we had talked about, right? Like Sonny moving to linebacker. Love that for him. I think it's a good fit for his skill set. I think it opens up the secondary, which has a lot of talented players back there. So I'm super excited to see that. One of the other things I always talk about is the offensive line and kind of, what that's going to look like, how those guys are going to grow into a unit there. I think this spring is really pivotal. And I would love to see Justin Fry try guys out at different spots, try a bunch of different lineups there just to see, right? Like you have to figure out what the best 5 are going to look like. And here's your opportunity to do it. But the room that I haven't talked about enough, talked about him a little bit, wide receiver room.
Yeah.
We were used to, having some top flight guys, and certainly they have the talent there, but not so much the experience anymore. We know that Emeka Egbuka is going to be the guy. It seems like Jaden Ballard's kind of, has his opportunity to lose reps at this point throughout the spring, but we saw flashes from Carnell Tate. We know Brandon Inniss is talented, and I keep seeing the photos, and I know how this whole photograph thing goes because my body changed and developed when I got onto campus, and I felt like I was a little bit of a man my first spring. But Jeremiah, my goodness, he looks like an action figure. And so I'm curious to see by the end of the spring what the rep count looks like, who's really taking control of some of the different openings in the wideout room.
And that's going to be interesting there because, as you mentioned, the wide receiver room, Emeka Egbuka is going to be a guy that plays. How do they work Brandon Inniss in? I mean, he's a slot receiver, thick dude, very stout, great short range quickness. And Emeka can kind of play all over the place. So he's played primarily in the slot, but I think that's a function. You had Julian Fleming, you had Marvin Harrison on the outside. Well, now you have obviously JJ Smith, Jeremiah Smith, really, really talented player. He's looked really good early on in the spring. You don't want to say like as advertised,
Right.
but that's basically what you're getting with him. The guy that looks his production, Joshua, how he's run routes and how competitive he is, that is matched up with his physical traits and everything that we've heard about him. So he's looked very, very good early on, fit in very well. Cardell Tate, probably another guy they're going to play on the outside.
Yeah.
How's that going to look for him? I mean, there's a number of young guys that they're going to be working through. And, at Mecca, I think they'll probably rotate him in some, but, his rep count, hasn't been all that high. And it really doesn't need to be because of how much he's played over the course of his career. The fact that he's probably going to be a captain, he's a dude. Like he checks all the boxes of what you want. So, he's out there with Brian Hartline. I mean, you're basically kind of coach on the field right now in spring to get these young guys ready to go. And if the situation works out where we need you to play inside, great. We need you to play outside, great. He can kind of bounce around, and that'll also help his draftability and position value when you can kind of play all 3 of those receiver positions.
Fully agree with you on that. I think that it can be a huge benefit to Emeka to move around a little bit, especially this spring. It's always interesting when you talk about the veteran guys and balancing the reps there because, as you said, Emeka doesn't really need to take any reps, but you want to make sure you keep the edge on. There's some changes going on throughout the offense. Maybe not a ton of changes, but some newness that he's going to need to get used to, certainly. But again, it's a young room, and you'd rather put the all of everything on Jeremiah's plate and Carnell's plate and Brandon's plate to figure out exactly who those guys are going to be. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge throughout the spring when it comes to that room. And when you mention a young guy coming in and looking as advertised from a physical standpoint, that's a really positive development. But by the end of the spring, are you overwhelmed? Are you bogged down with all the install? I know as a young player, you get to that point. I did. my first spring where I was like, Coach, I can't learn anymore. Like, I'm sorry, dude. Like,
I
you put
can't
in
learn
another blitz.
anymore.
No, seriously,
I'm
put
tapped
in
out
another
on
blitz, and like I don't care. Like, I'm supposed to hit the A gap, dude. You'll like you'll be lucky if I recognize that it's a blitz. Like, I don't care. And so I think they ought to push the envelope, and see how much you can get him this spring, so you can have a good idea heading into the fall of what he's going to be able to handle.
So talk about Sonny Styles moving here, wrapping up this segment, and then we'll get to the offensive line a little later in the show because there's a lot of good stuff there about it's the room that you could really have the most combinations with because you have the most players. And so there's obviously some movement that's going to happen there, how that'll look. But you mentioned, 2 practices in the books. And I love going there day 1 practice. It's like 3 defenses and like 5 offensive plays. And you're
Right.
just kind of like mixing and matching what you're seeing them. You're talking to the guys, understand like they're not running that much. Like if you've seen the play, you're going to see it again in practice. So let's understand formations, route combinations, and everything that's going on. And in doing that, like, hey, they're playing basic stuff. You're playing some single high man, maybe a little cover 3, maybe some quarters, a little cover. Like you're very vanilla basic stuff, really no blitzes. And so what they've done, like, and then your personnel groups, you're kind of sticking with maybe 1 or 2 during practice.
Right.
I think with Chip Kelly, they'll run a lot of 11 with 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 1 back. But I think they're going to try to work in a lot of 12 personnel too, because it gives you that variety in the running game when you have 2 tight ends on the field. And with that, I think moving Sonny Styles up to linebacker, I think what they've been doing a little bit is some of that 3 linebacker package because you have CJ Hicks, Sonny Styles, both really elite athletes on the perimeter. You can match up to probably a lot of 2 tight end sets with that, play some man, play some zone, be able to blitz. And that's maybe not something that you could have done in the past, but having 2 guys there that have a lot of twitch and can move, I think is going to really benefit them. And that's kind of what I think we're looking at maybe early on.
Yeah, I mean that's what the game is nowadays too. Like the days of the big linebacker have passed us all by, Bobby. You couldn't play in today's game, neither could I.
DN, you just keep moving closer to the line.
That's exactly how I finished my career too. Just kept moving closer to the line of scrimmage. And so the reality is when you do have the athletes, it gives you some scheme versatility. I also like the idea of the offense showing the 12 personnel looks because it's hard to develop a linebacker room nowadays when everybody wants to go with 11 personnel. You only have 2 linebackers on the field. Where are you going to find your guys reps? Like back when I got on campus, it felt like we were in a lot of base. And so we were rolling, 3 groups with 3 linebackers in there. You could get legitimate reps for 9 linebackers in a practice. By the end of spring, you had so much attrition from guys being banged up that, they're almost too many reps. And so I think it's a good thing to give those guys those looks just so they can get out on the field.
Yeah, very, very impressive. So they've done a good job. I'm curious to see kind of how they deploy and continue to move forward when you do get in some of those sub package situations with only 2 backers, how they rotate CJ Hicks, Sonny Styles, what that looks like. Because both of those guys are obviously very talented guys. They need reps. They need to be out there playing. And then you have Cody Simon, who's kind of the old vet in the middle, who's we're playing traffic cop, knows exactly what to do, getting everybody lined up. And it's going to be exciting to see how that's deployed. So talked a little bit about that. Like I said, we'll get into the offensive line later. I have some thoughts on Caleb Downs and how he's looked because there's been some great stuff there. But coming up next, it's the one, the only, our guy, Mr. Anthony Schlegel, join the program right here next on the Bobby Carpenter Show. Welcome back in the Bobby Carpenter Show, and now the little 2-man weave has become a 3-man weave. The duo turning into a trio. I think we pulled him right out of the Australian outback, or who knows where he's been roaming around. Our guy, Anthony Schlegel, pleased to join the program live and in person and back down in Jacksonville right now. Schlegs, we got showing us some fresh kicks that you had.
Yeah, man, I got some J's. I got some J's on my feet, my other ones, I wear like all black J's, and I just went to the GOAT because that's the only place you can find them and get them delivered. Yeah. So I got these because they're a little bit different. I'm kind of just decide like which J I would wear at Ohio State and then which J I wear when I'm at the Armory working because I like working out in these. Are my workout shoes. But anyways, they were nice. I don't know which one do you guys like better. You like which one should be Ohio State? Which one should be like the Armory?
You know what they say about the all black shoes, and this particularly with Air Force Ones, I believe it applies to the Jays as well. Certified butt kicker, screw loose. Yeah. If you wear the all black shoes, that dude wants to fight. So if you want to look tough, when you already do look tough, wear the all black.
The sociopaths, cool. Dudes just walk around looking to fight people.
That's it.
Why not? That's called gas station ready. You don't have to. You can still be a lover, right? But when called upon, you got to respond. I mean, hey, man, let's go.
I love it. I love it.
What are we
I've never
talking
heard
about
that.
today?
I've never heard about that, Joshua. That's a good point. I feel like anyone that wears the all blacks, I see them in like a tank top, maybe something else going on. Like it's a little something going on there. Nick Saban, abruptly retired. Kalen DeBoer takes over at Alabama. And everyone was wondering, like, okay, Saban, why? Like, is he upset with NIL? Is it the game passing him by? And some of it is, man, you get in your early to mid 70s. It's like, hey, I've done this enough. I've won as many titles I'm going to win. I mean, chasing dragons. He was just in the Final Four last year. It's not like he's lost his fastball, and they were one play away from potentially busting through and having a chance to play and probably win another national title. And so he sat down with Chris Lowe and about the current state of college football. And after every season, look behind the glass. You sit down, you meet with your probably head coach, position coach, coordinator, depending on where you're at in your journey. Early on, it's just position coach. By the time you're going to be a senior, you're probably meeting with your head coach, maybe coordinator too, about what you need to do to get better this offseason, how you can help the team, leadership roles, all these different things. So Saban sits down, like most coaches do, talks to his guys, and his comment about state of college football. He said, maybe 70 to 80% of the players you talk to, all they wanted to know was two things: what assurance they have that they're going to play, because they're thinking about transferring, and how much are you going to pay me? And he goes on to say, so I'm thinking to myself, maybe this just doesn't work anymore. I'm not saying that it's bad. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm just saying that's never been what we're all about. And it's not why we've had success through the years. So it's a big statement. And I understand the guys. I think Nick's saying, hey, I get it. Like, they can get paid. Like, that's a big piece of it. How much am I going to play? Like, those questions used to be, here's what you need to get better. And then with that, the playing time and everything else is going to kind of roll with it. Schlegs, we'll start with you. Kind of, what are your initial thoughts when you heard him say that?
Well, I want to preface that by what you said, Bob, and that is, this is not the player's fault, guys. This is the fact that the NCAA is terrible. And there's a lot of things that could have been done at the very, very beginning by getting on a freaking whiteboard and getting really smart people in the room to say, this is how we're going to handle it, because the model is changing and the model is going toward the NFL. Okay. Now, what I will say about this is, I think Nick Saban goes to the deal is the juice really worth the squeeze anymore? I'm 72 years old. I've won 6 national championships, and I have all these other underlying variables that take me away from what I love to do, which is coach football. We heard Chip Kelly make comments about that. I'm not going to go into it because I see him, but that's really what it boils down to, guys. Like, when you get into the profession, you love coaching and fostering relationships and helping people achieve their dreams and success within the team confines. That's why we do it, man. And when you play the game of football, that's why you do it. But yet there's these underlying factors. And if you go back in and you start, and I started thinking about this, and we've talked about this before, you can't, as a CEO, you can't work in the business and also work on the business. You don't have enough bandwidth. And then you start taking all the different stakeholders that a CEO has to navigate in college athletics, players and their families, the staff, right? The staff, because you got to have a staff, because if not, they're going back and forth, their development, et cetera, the universities. Now you have the collectives, and then you also have the fans. Like, that's a lot. And you only have so much bandwidth to be able to do that. But then you're also fostering these questions from your players. And all you want to do for them is help get them to the next level while also building a team, fostering that, and winning a championship. That's a lot. And I think, and again, that all came into his decision. It's not the main mover, but it is one of them. Joshua.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying there. It's a difficult spot, and yes, we should not blame players for this. This is a nasty environment that's been allowed to be created here. And I look at a guy like Saban, where he's like, dog, I'm in my 70s. I don't need to change for anybody. And the way that I know how to build a program is not the way that we can build it moving forward. And so I appreciate a guy for calling his own shot and saying, listen, it's a different game for somebody else to have to deal with, and those people can deal with it. I think there needs to be change, right? Like, I think we need to get back to a place where coaches feel like they can manage their rosters, and they don't have to be a fundraiser primarily. That's crazy. They don't have to worry about guys kind of, holding their feet to the fire about playing time and money. I mean, you talk about this being more of an NFL model. I mean, guys come up on free agency when their contract's up, right? Like, they have contracts. Their value is defined for however long it is, and they got to show up to work, and they got to do the work in order to make sure that they can get the money. Like, are we looking at an environment that needs to go that direction? I'll be curious. But in the meantime, I'm also wondering, if you're an AD, do you start to reevaluate what you find important when you're looking at a head coach? Because what we have seen as of late is we're going to take the best and brightest coordinators, and we're going to insert them into head coaching roles. And now, being a head coach, doesn't matter if you can call a damn play. Like, does anybody care? Because there are a million other things you have to manage. Like, I'd be looking at special teams coordinators, and I'd be like, okay, these are guys who understand the inventory of the roster. They understand how to manage reps. They understand when and where they can use guys. Is that more valuable than having a dude who was a wizard when it came to calling offensive plays? Is the offensive coordinator even going to be happy now being a head coach? We've seen examples where those guys might not be. And quite frankly, at the big schools, you make $2.5 million being a coordinator. You're probably okay doing that anyway. All that to say, a lot of things changing right now. I think inventory needs to be taken everywhere, from the institutional level with the universities and how they operate, but also from the governing bodies. Like, it's about time you step up and do something.
Yeah, and hopefully the Big Ten and the SEC, and we'll kind of get into that too a little bit later, about, they're more closely aligned now than ever before with how this thing looks. And I think they want to try to solve some of these problems and get it fixed. And back to Saban's comments, like, I don't think anybody's blaming the players. Like, they're just simply playing in the game that was created for them. You wonder why, and they go back, years about all, the big collisions in the secondary. Well, when you quit letting guys like run side by side and get physical during the route, well, then the next evolution was like, okay, well, we'll just try to dislodge the ball once they catch it. So we're going to promote they're just out there trying to separate human from ball and creating these massive collisions and other injuries. So there's other stuff there. There's always these unintended consequences. And, I'm still a believer that, like, hey, if you have your value proposition and you recruit the right guys and they come in there and you have good relationships with them, and everybody now in our society, they want the success yesterday. They want all the fruits of all of these things, as opposed to, if you get better, and this is what Nick was talking about, like, you get better, you're going to play, and then you're going to get paid, and get paid a lot because of how good you ultimately are. And instead, it's inverse. And we're asking the questions like from the top down, as opposed to asking them on the way to build of what we're going to ultimately look like. And that, to me, I think where he probably got a little sideways. And I think they've done a good job with that at Ohio State. When you don't recruit highest bidder guys, and it's like, hey, this is what we have for you. You want to come here, you can play. This is the opportunities. We're going to coach you really hard. And maybe this place isn't for you. Maybe it's not for everybody. And that's something that they got to understand. And in doing that, there's a transparency and an honesty. And I think Nick probably looks, it's a lot different than, DeBoer's a little younger. And you talk about DeBoer, Joshua, like, do you want a head coach? He's only ever really been a head coach. Like, he was never that coordinator. He's grinded up through the ranks. So, like, he understands this element maybe a little more than other people would.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing. And to your point, finally, about the type of guys that you're bringing in, I think that's important. The other thing is, when you're a coach, you have to think about, what are we teaching people? And I felt like I was around great teachers just from the game and like life, but also like values. And I'll tell you right now, you go out in the real world and you start talking about, well, what can you do for me? What have you proven to me? Right? Like, where is your value at? Because I'm not getting ready to hire some entitled kid. Like, it's never going to happen. And some of these kids are going to go out into the world, and it's going to be a little bit of a rude awakening.
Absolutely. Well, I'll hop in with that, and it's the fact that this is, I think you can honestly do exactly what Saban said in today's world. You have to understand the people that you're teaching, and it's the why, it's the what, and it's the when type culture. Your job is to be an educator. Your job is to develop, and your job is to find those people that want what you're offering, because then they will be all in. And again, teams led by the leaders of the team are the best ones, but that comes through the culture and the indoctrination of it and upholding the standard, regardless of where you are. And I think that the universities that do that the best of recruiting those type of people, again, you win as a team, right? You need some horses to do so, but that will allow you to have long-term sustaining success. All of these other ancillary things are part of that puzzle and part of that pie, but you can't ever lose focus of you win with people. And it's our job as coaches and educators to help facilitate that with the right people in the building, because it's all made an impact on all of our lives that are talking right now.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Schlegs. We're going to say goodbye to him. Up next, Chip Kelly, Joshua alluded to. He had some comments. He was on the Pat McAfee show talking a little bit about that CEO role, what that's going to look like. We'll dive into that here next on the Bobby Carpenter Show. Welcome back in to the Bobby Carpenter Show. Said goodbye to Schlegs. He's back out running around. Probably just spun around and back in that squat rack, Joshua, and threw some weights on there. Started cranking out some lifts because that's what he loves to do all the darn time. As you mentioned, I think Chip Kelly or Schlegs, one of the two. You know, he went on Pat McAfee show, which, you know, I'm gonna have to talk to Chip, get him on here. Having a coordinator that's a former head coach, like, and your former head coach as well, if you're Ryan Day, like. You go do whatever you want, man. I know that you're going to stay inside, color inside the lines, if you will. You're not going to get out of pocket, say anything crazy, and promote the program in a very positive way. You know, and he was talking about the fact that, hey, you know, and he had some post-practice availability too, Joshua, where people are like, you know, why'd you do this, and that? And he's like, you know, last year we had a coach who, their quarterback coach, I think, left at the end of the season. He's like, I got to go coach quarterbacks again. He's like, it was the best thing that I'd done in a long time. And he's like, if there was a way that I could just maybe do that and call an offense and not have to worry about the other nonsense, perfect. And looked at some NFL jobs, didn't materialize, so he gets to come here to Ohio State. And I'm going to be honest, man, he seems really at peace. He's got a ton of energy. And I'm incredibly excited after hearing those comments about what he's going to mean to this program.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy who obviously wanted to go back to being a coordinator. It's very well documented, some of the jobs that he was looking at, whether it was NFL or college football. And to your point, I think that there are some coaches right now that are like, okay, I go into a meeting and I feel like I get to talk to my staff about scheme and about game plan and strategy and what we're going to do this week. And now all of a sudden the GM is walking down the hallway. Hey, coach, need to grab you. Need to talk about this. Okay. All right. So you go back in the meeting. Oh, well, now the AD's coming down. Hey, you know, need to talk to you about this with the boosters and fan engagement. And all of a sudden your coach is already in.
Fan engagement.
Fan engagement. Yeah, buddy. Hey, listen, fans are the ones you got to engage. They're cutting checks now too.
Hey, speaking of that, I mean, last Saturday they had
the open house
at the Woody, and
sure,
I forget how many people they said it was max, sold out. It was supposed to be 2 hours, and you know how those things go. It's not 2, it was 3. Ryan Day's taking, you know, like 400 pictures with everybody as they're coming through, some of the veteran players, and like that's part of the gig now. I mean, did that ever exist with Press and Urban, Woody? Like those weren't a real deal.
Urban would have crapped a brick if he had
Who are these people? What's going on?
I mean, exactly. And you told him it was 2 hours and then it became 3. Like, don't even start on that. But the idea is you have all these people pulling you different directions. Then you finally go back into the meeting room and they're like, well, coach, we already got through the game plan. Like, we already talked about strategy. Like, there's nothing else to talk about. And it's like, man, I didn't even get to do the job that I thought I was here to do.
I missed the
I'm
best
doing
part.
everything else.
You guys already eat the cake? You already cut the cake and sang happy birthday?
So what are we doing here? And so I can appreciate a guy who's got a level of self-awareness to say, I can't continue doing this job that I didn't think I was going to be getting into. And also I want to be able to dedicate myself into the craft. And so I think he would be at peace. I think any guy who's making that move would have thought about what it means and how his life is going to be different and what the changes are. And there is a piece that comes along with it. So I'm excited for him. Like I said, I'm excited to see what this offense looks like as all the pieces start to come together. But for Chip Kelly, like if you're happy coaching dudes and you're happy being up on the grease board during meetings, like that's exactly what you need to do.
Absolutely. And you talk about, you know, just coaching those guys. And I wanted to kind of dive in a little bit to the offensive line here. they obviously trying to figure out the center position last year. They had some issues, tackle maybe, with Fryer. How good was he out there? I think he did a good job, but obviously you're losing Matt Jones. So what do you do at guard? And there's some shifting sands that are happening. And, starting out, I think Seth McLaughlin at center, you have Donovan Jackson at guard, and you feel pretty good about that. You have on the one side, I forget who they had playing right guard. I have to go take a look at that. They had Fryer still a tackle. And I think the question becomes, then how do you find your best five guys? Because Luke Montgomery looks pretty good as a freshman.
Yeah.
You don't ever want like a true freshman offensive tackle. I mean, outside of like Orlando Pace, those guys are very rare. Paris Johnson, even like he was at guard at first. You've got some different guys that you can move around and shift, but the evolution that I think is going to be really important to watch, Joshua, as they see now, we started off with maybe group plan A as we really get pads on because they're in spring break this week. Coming back, it's full go. How is that ultimately going to look? And then, they kicking Fryer inside. Is he taking a little bit of both? And they just experimenting with some of those lineups.
Yeah, I mean, they got to figure it out, right? And for a guy like Fryer, I agree with you. He had some really good moments. I also thought there were some moments that were lackluster, but the idea of maybe being able to insulate a dude like him by having somebody else out there on the flank might be a benefit. I think for this offensive line group, we talked about just the lineups and figuring out what the guys are. If you're a dude like Donovan or a dude like Seth, right? Veteran guys who have played a lot of football. I think that their voices are as important as anybody else too. When they're out there on the field, they got to push guys. They got to give feedback too about what they're seeing when they're watching tape and what they're feeling when they're out there on the field about how things are going. So I think it's a good mix because you got the veteran guys, as you just mentioned, but a guy like Luke Montgomery, I'm excited to see if he has developed over this offseason and what he could potentially be. And when you have that mix of veteran talent plus some young dudes that are hungry, maybe thought that they could get an opportunity they didn't get a year ago, that's where you start to see guys making breakthroughs.
Oh, what's interesting, like this defensive line is really talented and really deep. And so, outside of having Jack Sawyer, JT, Tui Moloal, I mean, the next guy's up. Kenyatta Jackson looks like an NFL edge player. Caden Curry looks really good on the perimeter, very talented guy that can get to him. And so Nick Saban, I heard him say this, and we were talking about him obviously earlier. And it's a great point. And I always tell young guys this when they're, I got guys in front of me. How's this situation really going to shake out? And it's a conversation like Saban said, play so well that we can't afford to not play you. Like if you perform that well in practice, we have to get you on the field and we'll find a way. We'll move other guys around. And so if you're Luke Montgomery, they've got Fryer coming back at tackle. He's a senior veteran guy. If you play well enough and they do talk to Fryer, like, hey, we want to try to get our best five out there. You good moving to guard? Yeah, maybe I want to anyway. Maybe you don't, but this gets our best five. Great. But you've just got to go out there and shine when you're given your opportunities and given your time. And that's how a guy like Caleb Downs, as a true freshman, starts at Alabama because no coach comes in saying, hey, we're going to play these guys. And they think that, and you may want to, but they've got to prove it because you can't fool the room. And if you're putting in guys who aren't worthy of being on the field, everybody's always going to see that.
As Urban said, you got to be the best practicer ever.
And there's truth to that. And it's, going to Allen Iverson talking about practice and everything else. But guys have to know that you're capable of it. They've got to see it, and they need to see that consistency as well. Coming up, we got some college football headlines. With Johnny Manziel. Is he taking a stand? Is he getting on the all virtue signaling team, Joshua? Going to sit there and be a pillar of what we want everybody to be, aspiration. They've got an all era team, maybe some snubs on there, how that looked for college football during the original college CFP, what that looks like. And then coming up here in a little bit, we've got Tailgate Talk. Your questions going to fire away. All that here coming up on the Bobby Carpenter Show. Welcome back into the program as we get ready to cruise on by. We've got an all-era team that they put together, Joshua. There's a couple Buckeyes that made the list. Only two first-teamers on there, Marvin Harrison Jr., Chase Young, only Buckeyes to make the first team. Joey Bosa, only second-teamer. We're talking about the whole pantheon, obviously, of college football in this most recent era. Kind of how do you feel about that?
I mean, I played with some really good players. I would
Yeah.
put some of the guys up that I played with up against anybody. You mentioned Marvin Chase being on there, deserved to be. Joey Bosa. I mean, I give him a lot of credit for the fact that I was a draft pick because he would create chaos and I would just make tackles, right? Like he's a dude that certainly deserves to be on there. You start looking down the list, Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah, number 15 not being on there is a glaring omission.
Come on, man. That dude was, late in the year too, critical during that playoff run. Mike Thomas might not have had some of the numbers, but if we're talking about just straight up players, right? Like he was so good. And then some of the guys out of the secondary too. I don't know how you get to a point where Malik Hooker, who I thought was phenomenal, Von Bell played really well, Jeff Okudah out there playing corner. Like there's some guys that I think were snubs.
Oh, you think about all the secondary guys who were drafted in the first or second round over that time period, and none of those guys made the first, second, or third team. Kind of crazy to me. You talk about Denzel Ward, even Marshawn Lattimore. I mean, there were some really talented players out there. Garyon Conley, Eli Apple. I mean, dudes who were first round picks that performed at a super high level. The Michael Thomas thing's interesting because he doesn't have the stats. But Zeke is a glaring omission. I mean, he's a guy that could get you yards. He could catch the ball in the backfield. He was a great blocker. He could get you a yard, and he could also get you 90. Like he was everything you really wanted in a running back, and he showed that all in the biggest games. And to quote,
dude ran for like 250 in a national title game.
Yeah. Well, to quote your guy Urban Meyer, when we needed you the most, you gave us your best. And you look at those two games, Bama and Oregon. I mean, he was virtually unstoppable.
Yeah, I mean, part of this is like, you don't get to watch these guys in the background. You see them on game day. And I felt like what he did on game day should have been enough to be on one of the teams here. But I also watch this dude every day in practice. Yeah. And we were just talking about, practicers and guys who you have to put on the field because they show they're so good in practice. He was one of the hardest practicers I have ever seen. This guy had no quit in him. He went hard every single rep. And that's why he played so well on Saturdays.
He did. One other news story that kind of cropped up here this week, Johnny Manziel.
Yeah.
Heisman Trophy winner.
Yeah.
He's coming out, and he's going to be the pillar of virtue in the community.
Sure.
Reggie Bush, a guy who's my era, my age, won a Heisman Trophy back in the 2005 season. It was stripped, obviously, for him taking impermissible benefits. Nothing on the field, nothing academic, nothing outside of there, just the fact that his parents were living in a house and had a car. And a lot of it was to them. And now he had to give his Heisman Trophy back when you have guys that are making $6-7 million a year. So Johnny Manziel said he won't attend the ceremony until he gets his Heisman Trophy back. Is Johnny Manziel your new hero, Joshua?
Yeah, no, it's the right message. It's the wrong messenger. And, he even talked about the morals and the values that he has when he put out the tweet. And I was like, come on, Johnny. Come on, man. So it's the right message. Reggie needs that Heisman back, especially with the climate nowadays. But the messenger, probably not the best one.
Well, hey, and here's the thing. A coach gets in trouble, you get like a 5-year show cause, different things. If you wanted to take it away, like, hey, you can't go to the ceremony for 5 years or whatever it is. I get it. But let's have some sort of expiration on this to where he can get back. He didn't take PEDs. He didn't cheat. There was nothing going on. He violated amateurism, whatever, and that has been violated at a high level. It is done with, and that is over now. So hopefully, like you said, right message, wrong message, or hopefully they do the right thing. The Heisman Trust. I mean, I'm a voter for him. I feel pretty good about that. I just want to see the guy, Reggie Bush, who was one of the most dynamic players I've ever seen, get his trophy back. Coming up, we've got Tailgate Talk. Your questions we get answered. And there's a lot of them about spring ball coming up next on the Bobby Carpenter Show. Welcome back in. It's our favorite segment, Tailgate Talk, and it is brought to you by Tipico. The Tipico Sportsbook is going to change the way you bet with their new Tipico Rewards program. The more you bet, the more you can earn and win. And to celebrate this, Big Play is going to be holding our own company-wide contest to see which of our shows can climb the leaderboard and prove that they're the best bettors at Big Play. The winning show may even give out some bet credits to their listeners each month. Maybe that's the Bobby Carpenter Show. We'll find out. So be sure to follow along with all your favorite big play personalities. That's us on social media to lock in the bets with us all week long. Oh, goodness, there's going to be some great futures coming up. We got March Madness on the horizon. There's a lot of great stuff. Must be 21 years old to gamble. Gambling problem? We'll just call 1-800-GAMBLER. Some great questions right now, Joshua. Goodness, where do we even start? First week of spring ball in the books. No pads yet. Those will be popping on after spring break, after this week. Question for Mitchell. How do you think Jim Knowles will utilize Caleb Downs? And do you think Ryan Day will consider using him on special teams / offense?
Offense will be tough. I know people are clamoring to have him back there returning punts. It seems like we haven't had. I think the last punt return touchdown might have been Jalen Marshall. That was
Your
back
guy.
when I was playing. Yeah. So it's been a little while. He had a punt return touchdown while he was at Alabama, but it was against Chattanooga. We haven't been able to do one against Akron. So we'll see there. For Jim Knowles, I feel like he's a guy where watching the Alabama tape, I thought he was really good when able to move around a little bit. They had him in the run fits, which I think, an athlete like him, use them to your advantage to try to equalize numbers there. But he's great in space, and he's really good tracking the football too. So I wouldn't try to put him in a box necessarily. Wouldn't try to have too many boundaries around him. You got to find a way that you can give him some freedom to go out there and make plays.
Well, I think when you have a guy too like Lathan Ransom, who's recovering from his foot deal, I think you probably put him more in the middle of the field, more in the post. And Caleb can do that, but he's such a dynamic athlete, and he's a guy that stood out right away. And you realize why he played as a freshman at Alabama. So yeah, I think he's going to be rolling down. They'll play some man, some single high. Obviously, you'll play him deep in the half and quarters and do that. But I think the more they can get him around the line of scrimmage, because he closes space really well. Some guys are just great at taking angles. They understand, they see it better than everybody else. I feel like he's one of those guys. And so he'll be a weapon. You can blitz him. You can do a lot of stuff. So I think they want to get him around the football as much as possible. And I think they'll have him return punts. Everybody's paranoid about that. I'm like, it's the spring. If it's, the 5th week of the season and he still hasn't practiced returning them, he'll be all right. They've had 2 practices down. We'll wait and see a little bit later. Offensively, they joke about playing him at running back and they say he's good enough. But you just got Quinshon Judkins in here, and you have Trey Henderson. There's too many guys that you're going to have to try to get out there on the field. So let's just stick with him at defense. Question though, speaking of that, are we going to see Jenkins and Henderson on the field together? I think we will. You may see some packages of that in the spring, but I think that'll be something they'll lean into more, maybe a little bit come the fall and training camp.
Yeah, you can't install entirely too much. You got to get your base offense finished up here. So if we don't see them do a lot of 2-back in the spring, I don't think there's an alarm there. To your point, I think in season, we should definitely see, maybe 5 reps a game where both of those guys are in the game at the same time. I think from a defensive standpoint, how difficult that is in terms of personnel groupings and adjustments and what you might have to be on alert for, weapons everywhere. And so I think it would be a travesty if they didn't use them like that. But am I expecting them to roll out all of the packages for everybody to know what's going on during the spring? No.
Well, and you're trying to get base stuff in first 2 days. Like we're talking about running your base zone power, all your NCAA All-American, the routes that everybody runs, base coverages. I could see maybe later in the spring dabbling with it a little bit, just to see how it looks. But I think that's more of a camp kind of install, something they'll work with. This question's coming from Falcon Buckeye. Maybe that's Urban Meyer. I'm not sure. Is Chip Kelly the real deal, or should Day have gone after someone else for the position? I'll let you start off with that.
I mean, yes, he's the real deal. There are a lot of people who believe that the game has passed Chip Kelly by in terms of what his offensive philosophy was. And I understand why people feel that way. And maybe in some regards it was, starting to get stale. But I keep going back to this idea that if you're looking for a guy who's one of the best in the business in designing a run game, you have Chip Kelly. Then you compare that with Ryan Day, who is one of the best in the business in designing the pass game. And I don't see a lot of flaws with the offense there. You got an experienced veteran guy who's in that room, who wants to do the job, who wants to coach guys up, who wants to get on the grease board and be creative and install and work on strategy. I really don't think that there would have been a ton of other options. I'd have been like, oh yeah, let's go get that guy over Chip Kelly.
Who
Like,
is that guy?
is there always going to be somebody out there that you covet? Like, sure. Right. Like that's life. Like, you get a new car and then it's like you see the next one rolling down the street and you're like, well, damn, maybe I like that one a little bit more. Well, tough luck. You got a really good machine rolling there. Like, let's stick with it.
Well, and a guy that there's no one's going to check all those boxes. There was head coach in the NFL, head coach in college, really good offensive guy. And by the way, like, he was Ryan's coach when he played. He coached underneath him. Like, there's an understanding and comfortability there that you can have, where you can have really honest conversations. And Chip even joked, like, well, how's that going with Ryan? He's like, he makes me call him sir, which, like, obviously was said in jest, but you can push back on your head coach. He can push back on you. And I think that that's a great thing for both of those guys. Lastly here, like, which freshman stood out the most? I think it's obviously, Jeremiah Smith. They call him JJ, Joshua, because the guy, like, looks the part. Everybody, he was the number one dude for a reason. And at quarterback, there's a bigger hurdle. I think at receiver, like, dude, you get out there and you're running routes and you're working on guys. And I can't imagine anyone else was looking better than him early on.
Yeah, I think to your point, there's a learning curve, a little bit more difficulty to some of the other positions. But I mentioned at the top of the show, from a physical standpoint, guy certainly looks like a collegiate player. You're at the Woody. I'm watching clips on Twitter, but I mean, he looks acrobatic. He's got really good ball skills, great body control, all the things that you need. I think he's looked impressive.
What's amazing about all this is we've went this whole show and we haven't said
Talked about quarterbacks.
Will Howard, Devin Brown, Julian Sayin, Aaron Nolan. I mean, Lincoln.
Is that a bad show if we don't talk about them?
Listen, no, we've had quarterback inundation. It is good that we could give those guys a break. We'll talk about it next show, about the rotation, who's getting reps with what, how all that looks. We'll get into that. This show is going to be about the dudes who are really doing the work, the guys who actually get hit, not the captain of the black jersey squad right now, Joshua. So we'll wrap up the show after this. Thanks for tuning in here on the Bobby Carpenter Show. I had one heck of a show here today. I had Schlegel join in with us, got into some talk about players transitioning, moving around. How's that going to look? New guys, Caleb Downs, how he's fitting in. Didn't really talk about the quarterbacks at all, which is kind of surprising. A little bit crazy, but there's plenty of time to do that. Buckeyes off this week for spring break. Then they're coming back for 4 straight weeks, culminating with the spring game in mid-April. So you got 13 practices left, 2 in the books. Chris Mortensen passed away this week, or last week rather. And I wouldn't say that it was, unexpected. I think it maybe came as a shock to some people. He's 72 years old, not an old man. We've watched him over the years. He's been battling cancer, I believe. You can see the weight loss, and just recently stepped away from ESPN. And a lot of people spoke very highly of Morton. It was not just to what he did, Joshua, in the field of journalism. He served our country as well. He served in the military. So fine, patriotic man, but also the fact that how he tried to help young guys, and he always wanted to get the story right. And I was up at ESPN for 5 years, and I can't even remember what the story was, Joshua. And he reported on something, and I don't know if it was with Ryan Day coming in with Urban Meyer or whatever it was, and it was pretty right, but there was maybe a misportrayal or a mischaracterization of it. And so I talked about it on the radio and how it went down. Next thing I know, I'm pulling in to watch my daughter's soccer game. I get a call from a number, and I'm looking at it. It's Bristol, and I don't answer it. And then I get a text, and it's Mort. It's me. Hey, will you answer the call? Gets on, talking about it. I'm in the parking lot trying to watch my kid, and he wanted to make sure that he got it right and fully understood everything. So unbelievable guy, really cared all about it a lot. And so that was my quick story on him. Great show today, Joshua. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of the Bobby Carpenter Show.